The venue looks terrific, and I hear from people every time I go there about how much satisfaction they get out of attending a Barries game. So I can't deny that it's on my radar for the summer of 2025.
Welcome to episode 321 of Alberta Dugout Stories, the podcast. I'm Joe McFarland. This is also the second episode of the week as we released a special edition of the show on Monday, looking at the demolition of Foothill Stadium in Calgary and what the future has in store for the city's baseball scene. So make sure to check that one out if you haven't already, as it features our own Ian Wilson and former Cannons owner Russ Parker. On to this week's show, and plenty of news to get to, and we'll start in the Western Canadian Baseball League as the Edmonton Prospects are officially no more. The much talked about team naming competition has come to an end, and the club will now be known as the Energy City Cactus Rats. Based out of Spruce Grove, the new brand is hoped to complete an evolution of the team's identity to represent the hard work, resilience, and passion of the players, staff, and fans. The logo is a porcupine wearing a reflective jacket and tossing a spiked bat. You can see more at albertadugoutstories.com. The other big piece of news from the past week out of the WCBL is that Alberta coaching legend Ray Brown is coming back to the Fort McMurray Giants. He was previously with them in 2019 and 2022, guiding them to their first playoff appearance. The coaching staff will be rounded out by former Giants Nick Cardinal and Tanner Hess, as well as former Cape Cod League coach Dylan Cooper. We're aiming to get Ray on the show in the weeks ahead. The Canadian College Baseball Conference season is fast approaching. Opening day is set for March 21st with the University of Calgary Dinos on the road to face TRU. The following day, Prairie Baseball Academy visits VIU, and the Edmonton Collegiate Hawks visit UFV. We are planning out our second annual CCBC season preview extravaganza. That'll be hitting the airwaves March 20th. On the college baseball scene, plenty of great storylines we've been following. We've gotten into this routine of providing 5 of the big player updates from the past week, so that's what we're going to do from here on out. Our top 5 this week starts with the performance of AHP Academy alum Hayden Dow. The New Brunswick native threw a complete game gem for Southeast Missouri, allowing no runs and 3 hits with no walks and striking out 9. He's now 2-1 on the season with a, get this, .48 ERA in 3 starts. Dow was named Ohio Valley Conference Pitcher of the Week for his efforts. Prairie Baseball Academy alum Max Benton also decided he didn't want to relinquish the ball to anyone else. Now pitching for William Woods University, the PEI native threw a 7-inning complete game, allowing 1 run on 2 hits with 2 walks and 6 Ks in a 2-1 win over William Baptist. Max Hartman is doing Max Hartman things again with Washington State University. He collected 8 hits, a homer, 2 stolen bases, and 6 RBI in 4 games against Iowa. The Dogs Academy alum is now hitting .381 with a homer, 9 RBI, and 4 stolen bases in 11 games. Camrose catcher Gavin Galenza is putting in a solid sophomore campaign with Colby Community College. The St. Joseph Academy alum had 11 hits, 3 walks, 8 RBI, and a stolen base in 6 games this past week. He's now hitting .467 with 2 homers and 8 RBI in 9 games. And out of Saskatchewan Clavets, Oakland Flodell went off with Northeast Community College over the past week. He picked up 7 hits, including 3 homers, 5 walks, 3 stolen bases, and 9 RBI in just 7 games. He's hitting .268 through 14 games. A big shout out to Matt Betts of Canadian Baseball Network for his weekly Canadians in College report. He has much more on several others out west, including Caleb Haney, Garrett Smith, Logan Rumberg, Tyson Kilbreath, and others. We try to share that link on our socials every week as well, so keep an eye out for that. And we'll wrap up the news segment with a few notes from MLB spring training. Calgary's Michael Soroka made his first start with the Washington Nationals on Saturday. He went 3 innings, allowing no runs and no hits while walking 1 and striking out 3 in what turned out to be a 3-2 loss to the St. Louis Cardinals. Vauxhall Academy alum Damiano Pomigiani finally got into his first game action with the Toronto Blue Jays this spring training. He went 1 for 2 with a double and an RBI in Wednesday's 7-6 loss to the Pittsburgh Pirates. That double came off his bat at 112.6 miles per hour. Okotoks Dogs alum Jacob Melton has been reassigned to minor league camp with the Houston Astros. He's reportedly been dealing with a back injury, but is apparently close to being game ready again. He's listed as the Astros' number 3 prospect. And fellow Dogs product Justin King is also heading back to minor league camp with the Miami Marlins. The Lloydminster native pitched in 1 game during spring training. And some sad news to pass your way from the baseball world in Alberta, as the Edmonton Amateur Baseball Association has announced longtime volunteer Mark Parker has passed away. He was involved in a number of programs, including Challenger, grassroots skills sessions, development camps, and basically anything he could sink his teeth into. Our hearts are with everyone who knew and loved Mark Parker. On to this week's guest, and he really doesn't need an introduction, but we'll give him one anyways. Jamie Campbell has been the host of Blue Jays Central on Sportsnet for years. He's also a former Alberta broadcaster, having worked in Edmonton during the 1990s. We first chatted with him back on episode 85 of the show. If you can go back that far in the archives, that happened during the pandemic, and he was in between phone calls that he was making to longtime baseball fans who were just yearning for a chance to watch their favorite team again. Now, since then, he made a trek back here last summer to catch a few WCBL games. He'll be coming back out here to Weyburn for their 2025 sports dinner with John Axford on March 15th. And as it turns out, he's become a lifelong WCBL fan.
Jamie, thanks so much for joining us here on the show.
Great to see you, Joe.
Fantastic stuff. It's been crazy to think 5 years since you and I first chatted. It was during the pandemic, and you're making a ton of phone calls. And I want to start there because I just feel like we need to catch up a little bit. We were kind of talking off air about it, but you made the point of calling fans of the Blue Jays and baseball fans in general in 2020, just looking to connect. You had some downtime during the pandemic. How many calls did you end up making over the course of those few months before the 2020 season finally kind of got underway, although there were no fans in the stands?
Well, Joe, because I wasn't working at the time, nobody in Major League Baseball was until late July when they kickstarted the season again. I had a lot of time on my hands. And also because when you're phoning people, you need to do some things. You need to write down phone numbers, write down names, write down when the best time is to call, write down area codes so you know which region you're talking to. So I had to literally document everything that I did at that time. And I was able to count all of the calls that I made because I would check them off after having these great conversations with people. And in about a 5 month span, I managed somewhere in the neighborhood of about 1,200 calls, which, some people say, what a, I don't know, heroic thing to do. Not at all. It was such a joy for me. And remember, I was basically unemployed at the time. I wasn't broadcasting Blue Jays baseball daily because there was no baseball at that time. And to be able to pick up the phone and call complete strangers across Canada and, and ask them about themselves and the lives that they've lived was such a privilege and such a joy. In fact, I still do it to this day. And I'm so glad that I sort of conjured up that idea. And as you would well know, right, because when you're in broadcasting, there's a connection you make with your viewer or your listener, and they don't mind hearing your name on the end of the line versus someone who's, calling because their ducks need cleaning or they're trying to scam them out of money, right? I was a very friendly and familiar voice to these people. So they received my call and we engaged in great conversations. I'll never forget it. And quite frankly, as long as I'm doing this job, I hope to continue it during the wintertime.
That is fantastic. I know it's going to be like picking favorite kids to a certain extent, but do you have one or two stories that really stick out to you, or one or two phone calls that made you go, you hung up the phone and went, wow, that was something else?
Yeah, there were a few. I spoke with a gentleman. This is crazy. He was a draft dodger, an American-born Vietnam War draft dodger who relocated to Victoria, British Columbia, and 10 years ago was diagnosed with a brain tumor and given 6 months to live. 10 years ago. And here I was in 2020 speaking with him. So he escaped his native country because he didn't want to go to war. He ends up in one of the most beautiful places on earth. He was diagnosed with a brain tumor and given a very brief time to live, and he managed to beat it somehow, some way. And what a conversation that was. I'll never forget that one. At the time, I personally had not yet been diagnosed with leukemia. That came a year later. So it was a profound conversation at the time. And I spoke with a lady in Saskatchewan who was 103 years old and had survived the previous pandemic
Oh, geez.
at age 2 in 1919 or 1918, I think it was. I forget. No, it was 1919. And and we were joking. I said, "Wait a minute, this is your second pandemic?" And she kind of chuckled and said, "Yes."
Life changed over those 100 years, I'll bet, though.
Wow, my goodness, what a life lived.
It's amazing to think, but from your standpoint, what did you take away from those conversations, especially in that first batch? I know you continue it today, but what's sort of your inspiration or motivation to keep this thing going, or what do you hope to take away from those conversations?
I probably would have kept it just to a pandemic project, but what I did derive from it is that there are people who are, as they get older, um, physically confined to their homes or their communities. In many cases, don't have the retirement income that allows them to go and vacation in California or spend extended time in Florida or the South or something like that. So they have to find a way of keeping themselves busy in the wintertime. They're ardent viewers of the game of baseball, whether that's the Blue Jays or some regional team that they love, like the Twins or the Mariners or the Red Sox if you're in Eastern Canada. And I just found that there's a need to serve the people that are in their golden years in this country. And it's not necessarily the responsibility of the family. I mean, I have a mother who just turned 80 who lives about an hour and 20 minutes from me, and I don't see her as much as I'd like to because my life is busy. I'm raising two kids. I've got to feed them and get them ready for school and then, coordinate all of that when the Blue Jay season begins. So it's hard to get out to see her. Um, and sometimes when you reach that point in your life, I guess, and you and I will certainly get there one day, things slow down and people aren't as available. And sometimes a voice on the end of the line is soothing and comforting. And that's kind of why I've decided I I will continue to do it most winters, just because I have a lot of free time in the winter. So if I'm not busy running my kids off to school, then maybe I do have a moment to sit down and phone somebody and check in to see how they're doing.
Is it crazy to you at all that you're the comforting voice?
A little bit, in that, my father worked 40 years in the shoe industry. He was a shoe salesman. And my father could never have picked up a phone and called strangers. They would have, hung up the phone immediately. Like, why is this strange man calling? But the gift that my career has given me is that they recognize the name instantly, and in some cases the voice instantly. I called someone just a few days ago and identified myself, and their reaction was, "Yeah, right. Who is this really?" And I said, "No, no, your daughter sent me a letter and said that you're going through a tough time, and I wanted to phone you." She says, "I don't believe you are who you say you are." And I said, "Well," so I had to go through the letter that her daughter had sent me to sort of review some of the facts that her daughter had stated about her mother's life, and she finally figured out, oh, he's legit. And that's the gift of having forged this career, is that I'm not just some, like my dad, shoe salesman. I'm the guy that they tend to see most days on television, bringing them their favorite baseball team or their favorite game, and I'm familiar and friendly, and therefore not necessarily a threat in any way. And it usually leads to really good conversation.
Probably had a few conversations as well this past summer. You came through Alberta and Saskatchewan for a few games through the Western Canadian Baseball League. I mean, most people, when they take vacations, try to stay away from their vocation, if you know what I mean. And yet here you are taking in some more ball, even in a vacation mode. How much do you really love the game to be able to do something like that?
Well, you got to understand, I was a bit weird as a child when I was able, around the age of 14, I want to say, I think the year was 1982 specifically. Um, my parents somehow, some way approved my decision to get out of school early, or if it was summertime, leave whenever I needed to, to walk half an hour to a train station nearby and take a half an hour train ride into downtown Toronto as a 14 and 15-year-old kid by myself to hang out at hotels in downtown Toronto and wait for the visiting ball players to come down and board their bus for Exhibition Stadium. So going to baseball, even while working in baseball, is not necessarily a surprising thing from a kid like me. I spent oodles and oodles of time at Exhibition Stadium watching games by myself, probably 25 to 30 a year for the longest stretch. And they were not a competitive team back then. And I have upwards of 2,500 autographed baseball cards in my basement to prove that, I was a pretty serious fan. So, getting on a plane with my youngest son and flying to Medicine Hat and then driving to Sylvan Lake and then driving down to Okotoks, which is what we did over the course of 4 days, was not surprising at all. My youngest son does not enjoy baseball, but loved the trip for some reason and would like to do it again. So I am officially hooked on the WCBL, and that league has a fan for life.
What was it about the league or about the idea of taking the trip in the first place that made you go, okay, let's do this?
I have been watching from afar for so long that I thought, at some point, I've got to find the time to see this for myself. I think because in the last several years, I've really sort of expanded my reach a little bit here in Ontario, where we have the Intercounty League, for example. And, one of my favorite teams in our Intercounty League is called the Welland Jackfish. And they play out of a stadium that used to actually house a minor league team for the Pittsburgh Pirates. And the game day experience was unparalleled when we discovered it. And it's worth driving along the QEW, through Hamilton down to St. Catharines and then weaving your way to Welland to see this. It's a beautiful ballpark. The baseball's wonderful. The beer's always cold. The seats aren't expensive. And I started thinking there are probably ballparks and teams and leagues like this across this country, and I need to see as many of them as I can. So I knew of the WCBL for years. And, at the time that I really planted the idea, the Okotoks Dogs were a bit of a national story because of not only the success on the field, but the number of people that were showing up at Siemens Stadium. And I just thought, okay, well, let's start there. Let's go to Southern Alberta first. And I'd seen photographs of the stadium in Medicine Hat and thought, my goodness, that's beautiful. Let's make that a destination. And then I heard these great stories about the Sylvan Lake Gulls, and okay, well, we got to make the drive up there too. And it turned into something wonderful. And now I'm scheming about how the summer of 2025 is going to unfold, because I do have a little bit of time in between Blue Jay games. I haven't made a definitive plan, but I've got some ideas.
Especially Medicine Hat, also Lethbridge. Some pretty big roots. Medicine Hat, particularly when it comes to the Blue Jays. Was that something that kind of crossed your mind as you're going through the old athletic park and thinking, man, like Lloyd Mosby started here and Pat Borders and David Wells and Chris Carpenter. Like there were some pretty big names that came through here over a 25-year stretch.
It did. Yeah. Oh, it absolutely did. And even back when Medicine Hat and Lethbridge had minor league teams, I wasn't as tuned in. It's funny how in modern day we're so tuned in, if you love the Blue Jays, into every level of their minor league system, and you know who the kids are when they show up and who's coming through the system and who's dropped off as a prospect. I wish it was a little more available, that kind of information, when I was younger. But chances are, if I had known that in the 80s, I would have jumped on a plane and come to Medicine Hat then. But of course, I didn't have the income at that time. So I thought deeply about that when we went to Medicine Hat, for sure. It's just, the experience of being there as a local would be so interesting, because it's available to you throughout the summer, right? It's the best part about baseball, is that you don't have to go and you don't have to watch, but it's there if you need it. And it's there most nights. And if the sun's shining and the weather's nice and some of your friends are there, it's an unforgettable experience.
Mhm. Speaking of unforgettable, you mentioned being able to bring your son along for the ride. What
Mhm.
did that mean to you, especially as you think back on, how you got into the game in the first place?
Well, I have two sons, and the son I brought with me is the son who is least interested in sports. And the way I sold him on this was that he loves music, and there will be a lot of driving. So when we fly into Calgary, we need to drive 2 hours and maybe a little bit more just to get to Medicine Hat. And the entire way, he was operating the iPhone and orchestrating what songs we were listening to. And the weather was so good. He had his head out the window and he was in heaven. I said, the only thing you need to do for me is that you just need to come to these games for me, and put in the 2.5 or 3 hours while I enjoy a ball game. And you know what? He loved it. He never complained. The only time he complained was when we were in Okotoks. They'd asked me if I would be interested in throwing out the first pitch, the ceremonial first pitch, and I
Hmm.
and I certainly wanted to. My son, though, was asked if he would like to come down too, and he's petrified of large crowds and acknowledgement and that kind of thing. And they mentioned his name over the loudspeaker, and he was so spooked by it, he sort of disappeared somewhere in the stadium, because he's on the autistic spectrum, on
Right.
the mild end of the autistic spectrum. And I came off the field after throwing out the ceremonial first pitch and couldn't find him. And thankfully, a couple of people from the dogs said, "Oh, he's up here, he's over there, he's somewhere safe, not to worry."
Hmm.
In fact, I think the owner of the team, John Incarndia, located him and brought him back to me. But it, he loves it. He thinks about it all the time and mentions how great a time he had. We won the 50-50 in Medicine Hat,
Oh,
and I
geez.
had just randomly bought a ticket and handed it to him and said, "Keep an eye on this. And when they announce the numbers, you be the one responsible for checking." And I was in conversation with some people, and he taps me on the shoulder and he says, "Dad, I think we won this thing." And I said, "You're kidding me." So that was fun.
Unbelievable. Looking back, I mean, it was a short trip, but anything really stand out to you from a ball perspective or from an experience stadium wise perspective that really stood out to you during your short trip here?
A couple of things. One, the stadium experience in each venue that I went to, Medicine Hat, Sylvan Lake, and Okotoks, was exquisite. I mean, let's let's explore that idea right there. I mean, I've been to a lot of rundown places to see baseball. None of these places are rundown. They're majestic and beautiful. And the one in Sylvan Lake is kind of out in a field.
Mhm.
It literally feels like you're driving to the field that they cut in the cornfields for the movie Field of Dreams. It really does, because you're in line behind a bunch of pickup trucks and there's dirt and dust flying all over the place, and then you pull up to the stadium and it's just heavenly. Secondly, the level of play, because the participants are young and they're not finished their professional careers. You see a lot of older players here locally in the intercounty league whose shot at pro baseball has come and gone, so now they still want to play the game, so they come home and they work as firefighters and then play for the local team. In the WCBL, it's a little bit different in that these kids still have a chance to rise through affiliated baseball. The fun thing about being in Sylvan Lake for us is that it was days before the major league draft. And one of the Gulls star players was Nathan Flewelling, right?
Mhm.
Whose parents, I ran into his parents the moment we walked into the hotel in Red Deer. And it was just so neat to watch him days before he was ultimately drafted in the third round by the Tampa Bay Rays, because, that journey for him is just beginning.
Mhm.
And that's probably one of the reasons why the level of baseball was so good.
How cool is it to see it from that perspective as a bit of an outsider? And one of the things that Ian and I always talk about is how we're starting to see this real grassroots movement towards getting, whether it's Nathan Fluellings of the group, Eric Sabrowski made his MLB debut with
Hmm.
Cleveland this past year. There's a few more of those Western Canadians who are starting to make some waves.
The
How important is
tugboat,
it?
right?
Tugboat's story is phenomenal as well. I mean,
Incredible.
you think
Yeah.
about that, and I'm a big believer in if you can see it, you can be it. But how important is it for teams like the Dogs or the Gulls or the Moose Jaw Miller Express or the Weyburn Beavers to provide that uh, opportunity for young players to go, hey, I can get there one day too.
Well, it's critically important when you consider that it's not just Canadian kids that get this opportunity. Like I'm thinking of Andrew Kittredge, who's had a reasonably successful major league career and who pitched in Okotoks at one point. He needed a place to showcase his game in the summer, and not everybody gets invited to the Cape Cod League. So that place for him was Alberta. And, it's incredible how the opportunity that a league like this can provide um, is a really important aspect of the journey that they can take to professional baseball and if they're lucky to the major leagues. But beyond that, the life experience. I mean, you think about these kids that come from Florida or California or anywhere in the southern states, and they're playing summer league ball in Weyburn or Saskatoon or Fort McMurray. What an incredible life experience that must be. One that they can take back and explain to their friends and family that it was a joyous time in my life.
How much did you love the Berries brand rollout, just from a look and feel perspective, from as an outsider?
I hate to bring hockey into the conversation, but they from a success standpoint, they were almost like the Vegas Golden Knights when they
Mhm.
were introduced to the NHL and suddenly became an immediate contender. I've been by that stadium many, many times. I do a fundraiser for the Kinsman Club almost every winter in Saskatoon, and the venue looks terrific. And I hear from people every time I go there about how much satisfaction they get out of attending a Barry's game. So I can't deny that it's on my radar for the summer of 2025. I would like to get out to the league out in further west and see teams in Victoria and Nanaimo as well, which is also a possibility. And then I'm investigating the idea of maybe doing something on the East Coast as well. But there's baseball all over this country, and it's not hard to find if you look for it.
Absolutely. Speaking of road trips, you got quite the one coming up in just a couple of weeks here. You've got Weyburn, and you went to Saskatoon, as you mentioned a little bit earlier on in the winter here. What's it meant to you though, as you think back on that and think ahead to these, to be able to spread the gospel of baseball across the entire country like you do?
Spreading the gospel is important, but also ensuring that the revenues are in place for these teams to continue to function. And I know, having connected now with the club in Weyburn, that they're having a fundraiser to help ensure that they have the revenue to be able to not only operate but assist in sort of the local development of facilities and young players. And any chance I get to help an organization develop in that respect, and I know some of these fundraisers that we're doing, some of the money generated goes into improving the existing facilities. I'll do that if I have the time. I'll do it. I just feel so strongly about the growth of baseball in Canada, in every province at every level, whether it's baseball, whether it's challenger baseball. I was reading today about registration in Manitoba for challenger baseball, which is close to my heart as well. I'll do whatever I can. I don't have all the free time in the world, and I am dealing with leukemia, and I'm still raising two young men. But every chance I get, when somebody reaches out and they need my assistance to present this game in some fashion to a community, I do the best I can to assist.
You mentioned leukemia, and I wanted to No, how much of that over the last few years has really shaped your outlook on life and your outlook on being an active member of not just the baseball community, but I think the community at large in Canada?
Well, I'll be honest with you, Joe. I always had this really rosy outlook on life. From the time I was a teenager, I made a point even then, and I even remember a very specific instance when I was 17 years old, just having a conversation with myself, if you can believe this, and saying, hey, there's no guarantee that you survive beyond tomorrow. So enjoy whatever comes and make sure you see it, smell it, feel it, and relish it. So I already had that mindset when I got diagnosed in January of 2021 with what's called CLL, chronic lymphocytic leukemia. Now, I'm very lucky because my leukemia is treatable. It's not curable, but it's treatable. And I am in treatment as we speak, and that treatment is fantastic, and it's keeping me alive. Um, it altered my perspective a little bit in that I see things differently. I'll never forget the first walk I went on with my two sons in the days that followed my diagnosis. And I'd gone on walks with my sons hundreds of times before, and this one just felt different. It looked different and it felt different. And I can't explain it. I guess you'd have to, to receive the kind of diagnosis I did to understand it. But the beauty, and sometimes people, and I've heard others say this, sometimes people say that getting a diagnosis like this can be a bit of a blessing because it wakes them up to what they weren't seeing. And the beauty for me is that I'm seeing so much more of my existence now. I mentioned this earlier. I literally take the first sip of coffee every morning, and I taste it and I relish it. It's not just something that I consider a given every day. It's something that I cherish. It's the simple things. It's the smiles and the conversations that you can have from day to day with people you don't even know very well. And I just see those things so much more than I ever did. And I'm so grateful to work in the field of baseball because baseball's kind of built on that when you think about it. Baseball's built on, hey, we're having a game today, right? It's why it was called America's pastime. Is over 100 years ago, it was just something that brought a community together. We're having a game down at the local park. Everybody's welcome to come. Bring your kids, bring your friends, and that's how conversations and ideas were formed at the ballpark. And then it became a serious professional game and the major leagues evolved and all of that stuff. I get that, but it is called a pastime for a reason. And so I almost feel like I got myself committed to the perfect sport for the kind of person I am. And that is engaging, conversational, and respectful of anybody who wants to show up at a ballpark on any given day.
I'd be remiss if I didn't take a couple of questions here to talk a little bit about the team that you cover the most, the Toronto Blue Jays. And as a fan, a longtime fan over the last few months, it's been a bit of an emotional roller coaster because we're in, we're out, we're in, we're out. We got a guy, we don't got a guy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a big fan of looking back on stuff. What's happened, it's happened. Spring training's here. I know we're really, really early on in the process, and I'm not going to make you break out your crystal ball or anything, but maybe what intrigues you the most about the 2025 edition of the Toronto Blue Jays?
It's not going to be boring. I called my broadcast partner, Joe Siddle, the other day, and I said, hey, at least it won't be boring,
Mhm.
right? Um, let's be honest. A lot of people are upset about the fact that the star of the Toronto Blue Jays, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., is still at this moment unsigned. Um, we live in the era of social media where people can voice those concerns publicly, unlike, say, 30 years ago, when if you really had an issue with an organization, you had to write a letter or leave a voicemail.
Mhm.
So now we're more aware of the frustration of the fan base, and it's totally, totally understandable. In the time that it has elapsed since 2016, the Blue Jays have made the postseason and not actually won a game in the postseason. And the feeling is that there's a window of opportunity coming to a close that involves the prime years of not only Guerrero Jr. but Bo Bichette. So where does that leave us? Well, I'm one who believes that if all goes right and this team goes off and produces at such a high level, and Guerrero Jr. is doing the kind of things he did a year ago, and Bo Bichette rebounds to be the all-star that he is, and Santander has a reasonably comparable year to the one he had last year, and the pitching is excellent, and suddenly the Blue Jays are contending again, and the Rogers Center is filling up again. Who's to say Rogers doesn't go to Guerrero Jr.'s agent, not the player himself, and says, hey, look, let's do this. When the season's over, regardless of how it pans out, go out on the market. And when you get your number one offer from a team, come back to us and we'll match it and or top it. Like there's, I know this so-called deadline has come and gone, but that doesn't mean an agreement can't be reached. In fact, I think the New York Yankees a couple of years back actually let Aaron Judge go to free agency too, and they were able to convince him to come back with a whole truckload of money. So it's not like it hasn't been done before. So I just say, hey, listen, enjoy the season. Let's hope for better things than what we saw last year. And, I know the Blue Jays have money to spend. Maybe they end up spending it on the two guys that they brought through their system since about 2015.
There's a really interesting dynamic I said from the get-go with Vladdy particularly is yeah, he's going in and he doesn't have his extension, but he's going in with a bit of a fire under his butt because he knows that he can get paid if he goes off. And if he does go off the way that he did in 2024 or more, he's going to get his money's going to come, right? And so that's a good thing for this Toronto Blue Jays team if all the cards play out and you get a guy like Max Scherzer doing, providing some guidance for that pitching staff, as you said, and the bullpen comes together. Like there's a hit. I'm an optimistic guy by nature.
Mm.
I'd like to think this is potentially a very good year for the Toronto Blue Jays, and they're going in as a bit of an underdog.
They are because the division itself is seemingly twice as good as it was a year ago. I mean, the Yankees might have looked a little off in the World Series, but they still got to the World Series. And for the most part, that roster remains intact with the additions of, people like Max Fried, for example. The Red Sox seem to have gotten better. They went out and got Crochet. They signed Alex Bregman. Suddenly, Boston is a better team than they were a year ago. Baltimore isn't going anywhere, and Baltimore's wonderful young core, despite the playoff failures in the last 2 years, is still probably from a roster perspective the best in the division. So there's three teams that the Blue Jays would have to skip past. And then for some reason, the Tampa Bay Rays are a horror show when it comes to facing Toronto every single year since they changed their name from Devil Ray to Ray. Mm-hmm. And there they are too. So like I said, who knows how it's going to unfold. I would recommend people just enjoy it. And ticket buyers have every right to not buy tickets if they don't like the product. I totally understand it. And you might see that, but I will say this. I was at every home game last year, and there was a point in the season in late July when you knew that this club was not going to make the postseason. And oddly, the attendance figures got bigger. By late July and all through August, I'd look around most nights and I'd see 30, 35,000 people in the stands. And what I think I saw was, okay, so they're not going to the postseason, but it's still a ball game, right? And it's still a joy to make your way down to the stadium on a beautiful Toronto night and see a game being played. And that's sort of the essence of what baseball has always been, right? It's like me going to Alberta for 4 or 5 days to see games from teams that I don't know well at all, but the experience was wonderful. And I know it's difficult when you're spending the kind of dollars that you are on Major League Baseball tickets. I understand that. But, in the city that I live in here, they showed up. And I'm guessing they might do that again this year.
There is not a better backyard party or a better backyard outing than a hot summer night at a ballpark in my books. So
It is.
I will
Yeah.
take it.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
Fantastic stuff, Jamie. I got one more question for you. I know I asked it in 2020. I'd like to see how things have changed, though, over the years. So, the final question we ask everybody here on the show: what's a game of baseball mean to you?
Oh boy, you had to unload that one at the end, didn't you?
Always.
Um, well, let's put it this way. I have really strong memories of my first time at a Major League Baseball game. The Blue Jays had arrived in 1977. My dad took me to a game in April of that year that was rained out. We went to the stadium anyway, even though it was pouring, and I came through the tunnel at the old stadium, looked down on the field, and there was only one player out there, and it was Carlton Fisk of the Boston Red Sox running laps in the rain. And Dad said to me, we're probably going to have to leave at some point and go home. And I said, just give me a second. And I ran down to the Blue Jays dugout, looked in, and the only player I could see in there had been the hero from opening day, a man by the name of Doug Alt. And I called him over and he autographed my glove. Like that, I was 9 years old. And that memory is so fresh in my mind, as was pretty well every major league experience that I've had since. So what does the game mean to me? It kind of defines who I am in the weirdest way. It's been an element of my life that is and always will be cherished because it has brought me such joy. I was at Wrigley Field this past summer drinking beer with my eldest son. Even though, and I'll freely admit this, at the time, my eldest son was only 18 years of age, so slightly under legal authority in the United States to consume a beer. But I said, too bad. I'm going down to concessions. I'll be back in 5 minutes. And I came back with a couple of beers. And that was a moment with him that I will never forget. And a baseball game gave me that moment. So maybe that's how to summarize it best is what a gift the game has given someone like me. And hopefully people who are watching and or listening to this podcast are deriving the same kind of joy from the game.
Definitely been a joy getting to catch up with you. Always a pleasure getting a chance to chat with you, Jamie. Thank you so much for the time. Thank you so much for the effort. And really appreciate you joining us here on the show.
You too, Joe. Great to speak with you again. And we'll see you sometime this summer.
Thanks again to Jamie Campbell for joining us this week, and thanks to all of you for downloading and listening. If you like this or any other show, make sure to leave us a rating and review to help spread the word. A tip of the cap, as always, to our Platinum supporters, the Okotoks Dogs, Western Canadian Baseball League, and Under the Lights Sports and Entertainment for their generosity and support. It helps us cover costs like web hosting fees, newspaper subscriptions, travel, and much more. If you'd like to join our roster of sponsors, head to albertadugoutstories.com/supporters. Until next time, thank you for all of your support online, on social, and on air of Alberta Dugout Stories.